Hello and welcome to the Import Export Hub channel, everybody. Bogdan here, your host for the next couple of minutes. I hope that you are all doing great. And guys, without making this intro too lengthy, let's dive into today's topic, in which I will cover the main imports and exports for Australia, a country very rich in natural resources, from ores and copper to gold or uranium. And you will see together with me later on how these commodities drove a big chunk of Australia's exports, and of course how these commodities supported a lot Australia's development in terms of economy in the last decade, given China's insatiable hunger, if you want, for such commodities, which unfortunately somehow dampened in the last couple of years. But anyhow, China, it remains an important trading partner for Australia, both in terms of imports and exports, even though they now have some problems. And let's not forget how China retaliated last year and imposed bigger tariffs on Australian wines. But that's another story. Now, going back to Australia, well, it's a melting pot if you want. There are a lot of ethnic groups there, from English and Irish to Italian, Chinese, and Indians. Australia is an open market with a secure and predictable business environment. It scores relatively well in terms of logistics performance. And in 2018, the last year in which the index was updated by the WTO, it scored relatively well in terms of this index. It had a score of 3.7 or 3.8, which was one of the best in the region, lacking at that time on chapters relating to infrastructure or international shipments. Australia has also a lot of free trade agreements, the oldest one dating back in 1983, if I'm not mistaken, with its close neighbor New Zealand, while the newest one is the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement, signed this year on January the 1st. There are a couple of free trade agreements not yet in force, and if you ask me, the most important ones are with India and the United Kingdom. And lastly, there are a couple of them on the negotiation table, if you want, like the Australian-European Union Free Trade Agreement or Australia-United Arab Emirates Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. So quite an interesting trading network, if you ask me. And guys, with this short introduction about Australia, let's dive now into the numbers here. And I will begin with Australia's exports, which for 2021 amounted to some $345.6 billion, with ores, slag and ash, mineral fuels and precious metals driving most of the exports. But of course, there are other important drivers in this top 10 list, like, I don't know, cereals, meat, aluminium or copper, just to name a couple of them. As for Chapter 99 here, which is on the 6th place in this top 10 list, so commodities not elsewhere specified. In case you're wondering, guys, well, here we either have goods delivered towards ships and aircrafts, like, I don't know, food, fuel or food, or goods delivered for the crew of the offshore installation or for the operation of the engines and machines of those offshore installations. Relative to the year-on-year changes, the overall exports rose with almost 36% in 2021, with big relative changes in most of the sectors, basically from ores and mineral fuels to cereals and aluminium. So a good performance overall. But as you can imagine, guys, they are heavily linked with the commodity prices volatility. Now, moving on to the import side, here the figures are smaller, some $249 billion worth of imports for 2021, with machinery and mechanical appliances driving most of the imports. On the second spot, we have Chapter 87, so vehicles, and on the third spot, we have Chapter 85, electrical machinery and equipment. Other important drivers for Australia's imports are coming from the pharma chapter or the one relating to furniture, just to name two of them. And in terms of year-on-year changes, 2021 was up 23% in terms of value, with chapters 84, 87, and I think 27 having some of the biggest absolute increases. And here, in terms of trade balance, well, Australia is doing pretty well. Not that the balance of trade is the best or most relevant indicator of an economy, but still they have some $96.7 billion positive trade balance, with only two chapters here in this top 10 import list having positive balance of trade, and these are mineral fuels, so chapter 27, and the precious or semi-precious metals with almost $13 billion positive trade balance. And now that I've briefly covered the general imports and exports, I would like to move on and cover the top 5 drivers for each flow in order to see together who are the main trading partners. And of course, where possible, I will try to give you a couple of the drivers. And I will begin with the top performer for the export flow, which is chapter 26, so ore, slag, and ash. And here we see how 2021 was the best year in this 2017-2021 time frame, with the overall exports amounting to some $132 billion worth of exports, with China, South Korea, and Japan driving most of the demand for ores from Australia. Guys, we have here some $7.2 billion worth of exports towards areas not elsewhere specified, which, if you ask me, they are reported like this either to protect company information, either as part of a triangulation process, which is a very, very used practice in commodity sales, in which the final buyer is not known to the reporting authorities. So again, this is just an FYI moment, if you want, in case you're wondering. And now getting back to the trading partner list, well, other important trading partners are Taiwan, Vietnam, or India, to name a couple of them from this top 10 list. And basically all of them had positive year-on-year changes. The biggest increases, at least in absolute terms, happening with China and South Korea, who cumulatively imported with almost $31 billion more. And I don't know, maybe, just maybe, guys, this increase has also to do with the fact that there were huge orders for container ships coming from the container shipping companies, as both China and South Korea are hosting the biggest shipyards in the world. As for the main drivers here, well, this is not a complex chapter, and we have heading 26011, so non-agglomerated iron ores and concentrates driving the exports both towards China and Vietnam. Now moving on to the second biggest export driver for Australia, which is related to mineral fuels and oils. Here most of the exports are towards areas not elsewhere specified, so a lot of triangulation operations and commodity sales, with almost $41 billion worth of exports, followed by the exports towards Japan, and we have on the third spot India, who in 2021 imported some $9 billion worth of mineral fuels and oils. We have, of course, other important trading partners in this top 10 list, but I'll mention here only the ship stores and bunkers line here, highlighted in yellow, which is nothing more, nothing less than the refueling or the bunkering activities for the vessels trading with Australia, and of course who are bunkering there. In terms of year-on-year changes, we have almost 39% increase overall, with the biggest absolute changes happening in relation with areas not elsewhere specified and Japan. And in what concerns the main drivers, well, for areas not elsewhere specified, we have liquefied natural gas, while for Singapore, which is a major refining center, we have crude petroleum, so subheading 270900. And guys, with this chapter being covered, I will move on to the third biggest export driver for Australia. And here we have natural or cultured pearls, precious or semi-precious metals. And here, if you ask me, there is not that much volatility in terms of year-on-year changes. Exports are slightly going up, and for 2021 we have some $20.6 billion worth of exports, with China, Hong Kong, and Singapore as the top three export destinations. But of course, we have other important ones in this top 10 list, like, I don't know, India, the United States, or Switzerland. Again, just to name a few. And relative to the year-on-year changes, the biggest absolute positive change was in relation with China, and on the other side, the biggest absolute negative change was in relation with United Kingdom, who imported with some $7.1 billion less in 2021 than it did a year later in 2020. As for the main drivers, subheading 710.813 is driving most of the Australian exports towards the United States, while subheading 711890, so coin of legal tender, is driving most of the exports towards Germany here. And with this being said, guys, let's see the fourth biggest export driver for Australia, which is chapter 2, so meat. And basically the exports here too are quite stable, with some $11.6 billion worth of exports in 2021. And we have here the United States, China, and Japan as the main export destinations. Of course, there are other important ones like, I don't know, Indonesia, the United Arab Emirates, or Singapore, just to name a few from this top 10 list. And relative to the year-on-year changes, the exports overall were up almost 12%, and except Singapore, who had a 4.4% drop, with the rest of the top 10 trading partners, we have positive changes. The biggest increase, considering again the absolute figures here, happening in relation with South Korea and the United States. As for the main drivers, frozen meat of bovine animals are driving the exports towards South Korea, while fresh or chilled bovine meat, which is more expensive than the frozen one, is driving most of the exports towards the United Arab Emirates. And now, guys, the last chapter that I will cover from the export flow is chapter 10, so cereals. And here we see how the absolute value increased from $3.8 billion in 2020 to $10 billion in 2021, with China, Indonesia, and Vietnam driving most of the demand. But of course, we have other importers, big importers like, I don't know, Japan, Malaysia, or Kuwait, just to name a few. And relative to the year-on-year changes, as I've said it, we have a huge increase, which in absolute value translates to some $6.2 billion more exports. All of the top 10 trading partners having imported more in 2021. And relative to the main drivers, for both Indonesia and Kuwait, we have subheading 100199, so wheat and mesclun. And now, guys, with the top 5 export chapters being covered, I will turn my attention on the import flow, and I will start with the first one, which is chapter 84, so machinery and mechanical appliances. And for 2021, we have some $36.8 billion worth of imports, with China, the United States, and Germany as the top 3 trading partners, which combined make up for roughly $21 billion. In terms of year-on-year changes, we have almost 21% increase for 2021, with big absolute positive changes in relation with China, the United States, and Japan, While relative to the main import drivers here, subchapter 841590 is driving most of the imports coming from Thailand, while for Italy we have subchapter 843149. Now guys, moving to the second biggest import driver for Australia for 2021. So chapter 87, here the total imports amounted to some $32.2 billion with Japan, Thailand and China as the main trading partners. But of course we have other important ones like, I don't know, the United States, South Korea or Italy. In terms of year-on-year changes, we have almost a 40% increase in relative terms, which in absolute ones translates to some $9.4 billion. And in this top 10 list, all of them experienced positive changes ranging from, I don't know, $50 million, as in the case with United Kingdom, to some $2.3 billion, as in the case with Japan. And guys, finally, relative to the main import drivers, well, for both United Kingdom and Mexico, we have subchapter 870323, so cars basically with a cubic capacity between 1,500 and 3,000 cubic centimeters. Now moving to the third biggest import driver for Australia, which is chapter 85. Here, also the values increased in 2021 with some $4.2 billion, and we have China, the United States and Vietnam as the main trading partners, but of course there are other important ones like the Netherlands, Japan or Mexico, just to name a few from this top 10 list. Relative to the year-on-year changes, except with South Korea here, which exported less in 2021 towards Australia, the rest of the top 10 ones have positive changes ranging from $12 million, as in the case with Mexico, to some $1.7 billion, as in the case with China. As for Australia's main import drivers from the Netherlands, most of the imports concern subchapter 851770, most probably cellular phones, while from Taiwan, subchapter 851762 is the main import driver. And guys, slowly but surely I'm approaching the end of this video. Still two more chapters to cover, and the next one is chapter 27, so mineral fuels and oils, which for 2021 the imported figures amounted to some $25.8 billion, with Singapore, Malaysia and South Korea as the main partners in this top 10 list, except China and the United States, who both had smaller export values towards Australia. The rest of them from this top 10 list had positive changes. The biggest absolute change happening with Singapore, Malaysia and South Korea. As for the main import drivers from Malaysia, we have subchapter 271019, and from New Zealand we have subchapter 270900, so crude petroleum oils and oils obtained from bituminous minerals. And finally guys, the fifth and last chapter that I will cover here is chapter 30, so pharmaceutical products, and for 2021 we have almost $11 billion worth of imports, which is 23% more than in 2020, with the United States, Germany and Belgium as the main trading partners. But of course there are other important ones like Ireland, Switzerland or India, again all important exporters of pharmaceutical products. Overall, the year-on-year change was positive, and except the United States, Switzerland and United Kingdom, which all exported less with the rest of the top 10 ones, we have positive changes ranging from, I don't know, $1 million, as in the case with Germany, to some $1 billion, as in the case here with Belgium. And finally, relative to the main import drivers, well, from Spain, the driver was subchapter 300220, so vaccines for human medicine, while from France, subchapter 300490 was the main one. And guys, with this being said, those were the imports and the exports for Australia for 2021. I hope you've liked it. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to hit those tiny buttons below this video. And as usual, until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.